People think silence is empty. They're wrong. Sometimes silence is so heavy it can crush an entire family. The snow had started falling just after midnight, covering Manhattan in a cold white glow that made the city look cleaner than it really was. I pulled my coat tighter as I locked the front gate of the shelter, my fingers numb from 12 straight hours of cleaning cages, carrying food bags, and pretending not to cry every time another dog got passed over. December always brought people looking for perfect puppies with bright ribbons around their necks. Nobody wanted the old ones. Nobody wanted the damaged ones. And nobody wanted Rusty. He stayed in the last kennel near the boiler room where visitors rarely walked. 8 years old. Part shepherd, part something bigger. One torn ear. Faded brown fur. Scars hidden beneath his thick coat. The kind of dog people crossed the street to avoid. The shelter manager called him a liability. Volunteers called him unpredictable. But every night before leaving, I sat outside his kennel for 10 minutes anyway. I never touched him. He never let anyone close enough for that. We just looked at each other in silence like two exhausted souls recognizing something familiar. That night, his low growl stopped me before I reached the exit. Not angry. Nervous. I turned around slowly. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing softly against the sound of the storm outside. Rusty was standing now, perfectly still, staring toward the front lobby. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Expensive shoes against tile. More than one person. The shelter was already closed. My stomach tightened as headlights swept across the frosted windows outside. 3 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot one after another, engines humming low like distant thunder. Men stepped out first. Tall. Broad shoulders. Dark coats. The kind of men who looked dangerous even when they weren't speaking. One moved to open the rear passenger door of the middle SUV. And suddenly the entire parking lot seemed to hold its breath. He stepped out slowly. Tall. Dark wool coat tailored perfectly over a black suit. Snow landed against his shoulders and melted instantly. Even from 30 feet away, I could feel the weight of his presence. Vincent Moretti. Everybody in New York knew the name even if nobody said it too loudly. Business magazines called him a billionaire investor. The city whispered something else entirely. But it wasn't Vincent that made my chest tighten. It was the little girl standing beside him. Small. Fragile-looking beneath a cream-colored winter coat. Long blonde hair tucked beneath a knit hat. She couldn't have been older than 8. One of Vincent's men held an umbrella over her, but she stepped away from it immediately, letting the snow fall onto her shoulders without reacting. Her blue eyes drifted across the shelter windows until they landed on Rusty's kennel. And Rusty stopped growling. Completely. Vincent noticed it too. I could tell by the way his expression changed for half a second. Not fear. Surprise. The front doors opened before I could stop them. Cold air rushed inside with the scent of snow and expensive cologne. One of the guards stepped forward first. "We're closed," I said quickly, trying to sound braver than I felt. Nobody answered me. The little girl walked past the men like they didn't exist. Silent. Calm. Almost ghost-like. Her boots squeaked softly against the tile floor as she moved deeper into the shelter. Straight toward Rusty's kennel. Every dog in the building started barking except him. He just stood there watching her approach with those tired amber eyes. The shelter manager had once told me Rusty tried to bite the last man who came near his cage. But when the little girl stopped in front of him, he slowly lowered himself onto the concrete floor and rested his head against the bars. And for the first time since I'd known that dog, his tail moved. Nobody moved for several seconds. Even the guard standing behind Vincent Moretti seemed uncertain what to do. The little girl remained kneeling in front of Rusty's kennel while snow melted quietly in her pale blonde hair. Rusty pressed his nose closer to the bars, breathing slowly now, the deep rumble in his chest completely gone. I had worked at the shelter for almost 3 years. I had seen that dog snap steel feeding bowls in half after panic attacks. I had watched grown men back away from him with shaking hands. But somehow this tiny silent child had calmed him with one look. "Lily," Vincent said softly. It was the first time he had spoken since entering the building. His voice carried through the shelter low and controlled, but underneath it I heard exhaustion. The kind that sleep could not fix. The little girl did not answer him. She never even looked back. One of the guards shifted beside me. "Sir, maybe it is better if she stays back," he murmured carefully. "The animal has a history." Vincent raised one hand slightly. The man fell silent immediately. Lily slowly lifted her gloved hand toward the kennel door. Every muscle in my body tightened. "Wait," I said quickly, stepping forward before I could stop myself. 4 guards turned toward me at once. The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. "He is scared of strangers," I explained carefully. "If he feels trapped, he might panic." Vincent's eyes moved to me fully for the first time. Gray. Calm. Dangerous in the quietest possible way. Men like him did not need to raise their voices. The world already listened. "Does he scare you?" he asked. I glanced at Rusty. "No," I admitted softly. "He just does not trust people anymore." Something flickered across Vincent's expression at that. Gone almost instantly. Lily kept her hand near the bars without touching them. Rusty leaned forward slowly until his nose brushed against the tip of her glove. The entire shelter froze. Then Lily smiled. Tiny. Fragile. Barely there. But real. One of the volunteers behind me gasped under her breath because apparently none of us had realized how tense we were until that moment. Vincent noticed it too. I saw his shoulders loosen for the first time since arriving. Not much. Just enough to tell me that smile mattered more to him than anything else in the room. Lily carefully reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small dog biscuit wrapped in a napkin. She held it out through the kennel opening. Rusty stared at it for 2 long seconds before gently taking it from her hand. Gently. I had never seen him take food carefully from anyone. "That is impossible," the shelter manager whispered beside me. But I was not looking at Rusty anymore. I was looking at Vincent. Because the man standing in front of me suddenly did not resemble the terrifying figure people whispered about in Manhattan restaurants and private clubs. He just looked like a father trying very hard not to fall apart. Lily rested her forehead lightly against the kennel door. Rusty mirrored the movement from the other side. Quiet recognizing quiet. Broken recognizing broken. Vincent stepped closer beside his daughter, expensive shoes clicking softly against the tile. "She has not reacted to anything in almost 2 years," he said without looking at me. "Not schools. Not therapists. Not doctors." His jaw tightened slightly. "Not even me sometimes." I swallowed hard. Outside, snow continued drifting against the dark windows in thick white waves. The shelter lights buzzed overhead while somewhere down the hallway another dog barked once and fell silent again. Lily suddenly pointed toward the kennel latch. My heart skipped. "No," the shelter manager said immediately. "Absolutely not. That dog is not safe to release." But Lily looked up at her father with those pale blue eyes full of something painfully close to hope. And Vincent Moretti, the man rumored to control half the city, stared at his silent daughter like she had just handed him back the ability to breathe. I should have said no immediately. Any responsible shelter worker would have. Rusty weighed nearly 90 pounds and had enough trauma in his file to scare away every potential adopter for the last 18 months. But Lily kept looking at her father with those silent blue eyes, and Vincent Moretti looked at her like the entire world depended on what happened next. The shelter manager crossed his arms tightly. "Mr. Moretti, with all due respect, that dog failed every behavioral evaluation we ran." Vincent did not even glance at him. "Open the kennel." The manager hesitated. Nobody in the room moved. Then one of the guards stepped forward, reaching toward the latch. "No," I said sharply. Everyone looked at me again. I swallowed hard and walked slowly toward the kennel. If somebody rushes him, he will panic. My heartbeat hammered against my ribs as I crouched beside Lily. Up close, she looked even smaller somehow. Pale skin. Snowflakes melting against her lashes. There were dark circles beneath her eyes that no child should have carried. She glanced at me briefly before looking back at Rusty. "You trust him?" I asked softly. She nodded once. "Tiny. Certain." I slowly unlatched the kennel door. Every muscle in my body stayed tense, waiting for disaster. Rusty remained perfectly still. The old metal gate creaked open a few inches. He did not bolt. Did not growl. Did not bare his teeth. He just stared at Lily like she was the first safe thing he had seen in years. Then slowly, carefully, he stepped out. The guards shifted instantly. Hands near their jackets. "Ready." Vincent raised one finger without taking his eyes off his daughter. Everyone froze again. Rusty approached Lily with cautious movements, head lowered slightly, tail still wagging once against the concrete floor. Lily knelt down fully in her cream-colored coat and held out both hands. When Rusty pressed his head gently into her lap, the entire shelter seemed to exhale at once. I heard one volunteer quietly start crying behind me. Even I felt tears burn unexpectedly behind my eyes. Because it was not just a scared dog trusting a little girl. It was two lonely creatures finding each other in a world that had stopped being gentle with either of them. Lily buried her fingers into Rusty's thick fur. And for the first time since entering the building, she looked warm instead of hollow. Vincent stared at them silently. Something about his expression hurt to look at. Not because it was cold. Because it was not. The dangerous aura everybody feared around him had cracked open for half a second, revealing a father carrying exhaustion so deep it seemed carved into his bones. "How long has she been silent?" I asked carefully before I could stop myself. One of the guards looked uncomfortable that I had spoken directly to him. Vincent answered anyway. 23 months. His voice stayed calm, but quieter now. After her mother passed away, Lily stopped speaking the next morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Snow tapped gently against the windows. Somewhere in the shelter, a radio played faint Christmas music from an office down the hall. Everything suddenly felt strangely human despite the men with concealed weapons and the billionaire standing 3 feet away from me. Lily smiled again as Rusty rolled slightly onto his side beside her boots. It was a small smile. But real enough to make Vincent close his eyes briefly like he physically could not handle seeing it. When he opened them again, he looked directly at me. "How much?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" "For the dog." I almost laughed from pure disbelief. Of course a man like Vincent Moretti thought problems could be solved with numbers. "He is not furniture," I said before my brain could warn me to stay quiet. Several guards stiffened instantly. But Vincent just stared at me with unreadable gray eyes. "Then what is he?" he asked. I looked down at Rusty resting against Lily's knees. "He is family to somebody who stopped believing they deserved one." For the first time all night, Vincent Moretti looked completely speechless. The drive to the Moretti estate felt unreal. Snow drifted across the windshield in soft white waves while Manhattan lights blurred behind us like fading stars. I sat in the back seat beside Lily because Rusty refused to leave her side. The old dog rested his massive head across her boots while she stroked his fur slowly with both hands. Across from us, Vincent Moretti remained silent through most of the 30-minute drive, answering occasional phone calls in a low voice that sounded calm enough to hide whatever storm existed underneath. Every few minutes his eyes drifted toward Lily. Not controlling. Not cold. Just checking that she was still smiling. The estate appeared behind black iron gates overlooking the Hudson River. Massive stone walls. Security cameras hidden beneath lanterns. Men in dark coats stationed at every entrance. The place looked less like a home and more like something designed to survive a war. But the moment Lily stepped inside with Rusty beside her, everything changed. Warm golden lights reflected against marble floors. Christmas garlands wrapped around staircases. Soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers somewhere in the house. It did not feel dangerous. It felt lonely. One of the house staff froze when she saw the dog. "Sir," Vincent barely looked at her. "He stays." Nobody argued after that. Lily walked deeper into the house with Rusty following so closely his fur brushed against her coat. She glanced back once and lightly tugged my sleeve. Not speaking. Just asking silently. "Stay." I looked toward Vincent uncertainly. "You should go with her," he said quietly. "She has not asked for anyone in a long time." Upstairs, Lily's bedroom overlooked the river. It was beautiful in the kind of expensive way magazines loved. White bookshelves. Giant windows. Plush rugs. Enough toys to fill an entire department store. But none of it looked touched. Everything sat perfectly organized like a museum display waiting for a child who never returned. Rusty wandered carefully around the room while Lily sat cross-legged on the floor beside him. For the first time since meeting her, she looked comfortable inside her own skin. I sat nearby watching her fingers disappear into Rusty's thick fur while snow fell softly beyond the windows. "He likes you," I whispered. Lily nodded faintly. Then after a few seconds, she reached into the drive to the Moretti estate felt unreal. Snow blurred against the dark windows of the SUV while Manhattan disappeared behind us inch by inch, replaced by iron gates, silent roads, and forests covered in white. Rusty lay curled beside Lily in the back seat like he had belonged there forever. The dog who could barely tolerate being touched at the shelter now rested his massive head across her small legs while she stroked his fur slowly with mitten-covered hands. Neither of them made a sound. They did not need to. I sat across from them trying not to notice the two security vehicles following behind us or the armed men riding in the front. Vincent sat beside me, one hand resting loosely against his knee, eyes fixed on his daughter through the dim cabin lights. "She used to sing," he said quietly after almost 20 minutes of silence. I turned toward him slightly. His expression never changed. Every morning. Snow reflected faintly across his gray eyes. She sang before breakfast. In the car. Around the house. Her mother used to complain she never stopped talking. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. Then one morning she did. I did not know what to say to that. Some griefs were too large for comfort. The SUV turned through massive black gates surrounded by stone walls nearly 12 feet high. The estate beyond looked less like a home and more like something built to keep the world away. Long driveways. Security lights hidden beneath snow-covered trees. Men standing watch near the entrance despite the freezing weather. But Lily barely noticed any of it. Her entire focus stayed on Rusty. When the vehicle stopped, she climbed out carefully and waited for the dog beside her like she had done it 1,000 times before. One of the guards moved instinctively toward Rusty's leash. The dog growled low in warning. Lily immediately placed one small hand against his neck. Rusty relaxed at once. Every guard exchanged looks. I saw confusion on faces that probably never showed emotion. Inside, the mansion felt strangely quiet for a place so enormous. Marble floors. Tall windows. Fireplaces glowing softly against dark wood walls. Expensive without trying to be. But there was no warmth in it. Not really. The house felt frozen long before winter arrived. A woman in her 60s appeared near the staircase wearing a navy sweater and glasses hanging from a silver chain. Her face softened instantly when she saw Lily. "Madonna mia," she whispered, pressing one hand to her chest. "She is smiling." Vincent handed her his coat quietly. "Maria, this is Emma Carter." She nodded warmly toward me before her eyes landed on Rusty. "And this must be the miracle." Lily suddenly tugged lightly on my sleeve. I looked down. She pointed toward the staircase, then toward Rusty, then at me. "You want me to come upstairs with you?" I guessed softly. She nodded immediately. Vincent watched the interaction carefully. "She usually avoids strangers," Maria murmured quietly to me. "Completely." Upstairs, Lily's bedroom overlooked the snow-covered grounds through giant windows framed with pale curtains. Toys sat untouched on shelves. Books remained stacked neatly beside a white piano covered in dust. Nothing looked lived in. Nothing looked happy. But the moment Rusty stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. He sniffed around cautiously before settling beside Lily's bed with a long exhausted sigh. Lily climbed onto the carpet beside him and wrapped both arms around his neck. Then she looked up at me. Really looked at me for the first time all night. Her blue eyes were filled with something fragile enough to break my heart. Gratitude. I felt it instantly. Before I could respond, a soft sound stopped the room cold. Tiny. Hoarse. Barely more than air. But unmistakable. Rusty lifted his head immediately. Vincent froze in the doorway behind me. Lily's lips trembled slightly as she buried her face against the dog's fur and whispered one broken word that nobody in that mansion had heard in nearly 2 years. "Stay." The room stayed completely still after Lily whispered that single word. Even the fire crackling softly beside the windows seemed quieter somehow. Rusty lifted his head from the carpet and looked at her with those tired amber eyes while Lily kept both arms wrapped around his neck like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. Behind me, Vincent Moretti had not moved an inch. I turned slowly and saw something I never expected to see on a man like him. Fear. Not the kind people felt when they were threatened. The opposite. The fear of loving something so deeply that losing it once had nearly destroyed you. His gray eyes stayed locked on his daughter while his hand tightened against the doorway hard enough for his knuckles to pale. Maria covered her mouth quietly beside him. "Sweet Mother of God," she whispered. Lily looked up suddenly as if realizing everyone had heard her. The fragile calm in her face cracked instantly. Panic flashed through her blue eyes. She pulled back against the bed, breathing faster now, shoulders tense beneath her sweater. Rusty reacted immediately. He climbed to his feet and pressed himself protectively against her side with a low nervous whine. "Hey," I said softly, kneeling down beside them. "It is okay." Lily shook her head quickly, eyes filling with tears she clearly hated showing. I recognized that look. Children who stopped speaking often feared the moment sound finally returned. Because silence became safety after enough pain. "Nobody is upset," I whispered carefully. "You did nothing wrong." Rusty nudged his nose against her arm. Lily buried trembling fingers into his fur again. Slowly, her breathing steadied. Vincent finally stepped into the room. Every instinct told me men like him controlled every situation they entered. But now he moved cautiously, almost like he was afraid one wrong step would shatter the moment entirely. He crouched several feet away from Lily, keeping his voice low. "You do not have to be scared, Principessa." Lily stared at him silently. Vincent swallowed once before speaking again. "I miss hearing your voice." The honesty in that sentence hit harder than shouting ever could have. No power. No authority. Just a father speaking to his child. Lily's eyes dropped toward the carpet. Then slowly, carefully, she reached one small hand toward him. Vincent froze for half a heartbeat before moving closer. He took her hand gently like it was the most precious thing he had ever touched. And maybe it was. Rusty rested his giant head across both of their knees as snow drifted quietly outside the windows. I looked away for a second because suddenly the room felt too personal to witness. Too real. Maria touched my arm softly. "You should stay tonight," she murmured. "For Lily." I blinked. "Oh, I really should not intrude." "You are not intruding," Vincent said quietly behind me. I turned back toward him. His expression had returned calmer now, controlled again, but softer around the edges somehow. "She trusts you." The mansion hallways felt warmer later that night. Not physically. Emotionally. Staff members smiled for the first time since I arrived. Guards relaxed slightly outside doorways. Somewhere downstairs, I even heard quiet laughter from the kitchen. Like the entire estate had been holding its breath for 2 years waiting for one tiny crack of light. Maria brought tea to Lily's room around midnight while I sat cross-legged on the carpet helping Lily sketch with colored pencils she had barely touched before tonight. Rusty slept beside us snoring softly. Lily drew carefully in silence. A small house. Snow falling outside. A large dog in front of a little girl. Then after a long pause, she added another figure standing beside them. Tall. Dark coat. Sad eyes. Vincent. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Lily stared down at the drawing for several seconds before gently pushing it toward me. At the bottom of the page, written in shaky uneven letters that looked out of practice, were 3 words that nearly broke my heart. "He looks lonely." The drawing stayed in my hands long after Lily fell asleep beside Rusty. Snow drifted softly outside the giant windows while the fireplace painted warm gold light across the room. Lily slept curled against the dog's side with one small hand tangled in his fur like she was afraid the morning might take him away. Rusty did not move an inch. He stayed awake watching the door the entire time. Protecting her. I sat quietly in the armchair near the bed staring down at the sketch she had made. "He looks lonely." 3 simple words. But they followed me like an echo long after midnight passed. Around 1 in the morning, I finally stepped into the hallway for coffee and silence. The mansion felt enormous at night. Too large for only 3 people living inside it. Most of the lights were dimmed low, leaving long shadows across marble floors and framed family portraits. I noticed immediately that every photo including Lily's mother had been turned slightly away from direct view. Not hidden completely. Just enough to hurt less. Or maybe hurt differently. I found Vincent standing alone in the downstairs kitchen wearing a dark gray sweater instead of the expensive suit from earlier. Somehow that looked stranger on him than the armed guards outside. He stood near the counter staring out at the snow-covered backyard with untouched coffee growing cold in his hands. "You should sleep," I said softly. He glanced over his shoulder. "So should you." The kitchen lights reflected faint silver in his gray eyes. Up close, exhaustion lived everywhere on him now that the sharp edges of power had faded for the night. "Lily finally spoke," I said carefully. "That matters." His jaw tightened slightly. "You think I do not know that?" The words came sharper than he intended because regret flashed across his face immediately afterward. "Sorry." I leaned against the counter quietly. "You are scared it will disappear again." He looked back toward the snow outside. For several seconds he said nothing at all. Then finally he nodded once. "Every doctor told me not to push her." His voice stayed low. Controlled. "They said healing would happen naturally if she felt safe enough." A bitter smile touched his mouth for barely a second. "The problem is I built my entire life around making people fear me." The honesty of that hit harder than anything dramatic could have. I studied him carefully beneath the soft kitchen lighting. The newspapers painted Vincent Moretti like a myth. Untouchable. Ruthless. Dangerous. But sitting here at 1 in the morning beside untouched coffee, he just looked tired. "Lily does not fear you," I said quietly. His eyes lifted toward me slowly. "No," he admitted. "She blames me." Silence settled heavily between us. Somewhere upstairs, the old pipes hummed softly through the walls. Snow continued falling outside in thick white sheets. "Her mother died because of me," Vincent said finally. The words barely rose above a whisper. Not directly. But close enough. I felt my chest tighten. He stared into his coffee cup like he hated what he saw there. After that day, Lily stopped speaking. And every time she looked at me after that, he swallowed once. It felt like she remembered something I wish she never had to see. I thought about Lily's drawing upstairs. He looks lonely. Children noticed pain adults spent entire lifetimes trying to hide. Before I could answer, a sudden sound echoed faintly through the mansion. Rusty barking upstairs. Sharp. Alert. Vincent was already moving before the second bark came. The softness disappeared instantly from his face, replaced by terrifying focus. We reached the upstairs hallway within seconds. Rusty stood in front of Lily's bedroom door growling low toward the far end of the corridor where one of the security guards spoke urgently into an earpiece. Snow blew violently through a partially opened window nearby. Vincent's expression darkened immediately. "What happened?" he asked coldly. The guard looked pale. "Sir, someone was inside the grounds." And for the first time since arriving at the estate, I watched fear enter Vincent Moretti's eyes all over again. The atmosphere inside the mansion changed instantly after those words. 1 second the hallway felt warm with sleepy silence and falling snow. The next it felt sharp enough to cut skin. Guards moved quickly through the corridors speaking into earpieces while Vincent stood perfectly still beside Lily's bedroom door. Somehow that stillness frightened me more than panic would have. Rusty continued growling low at the dark hallway ahead, thick fur standing along his back. Lily sat upright on the bed clutching her blanket tightly with wide frightened eyes. The moment Vincent looked at her, his entire expression changed again. Softer. Controlled. Protective. "It is all right, Principessa," he said quietly as he stepped into the room. "Nobody is getting near you." Lily looked toward the open hallway nervously. Rusty immediately climbed onto the bed beside her, pressing his body against her side like a living shield. Vincent noticed it too. I could see the realization settling deeper into him with every passing minute. The dog was not just comforting her. He was guarding her. One of the security men approached the doorway carefully. "The cameras near the north fence were disabled for approximately 90 seconds, he reported quietly. "We found footprints near the tree line." Vincent's face hardened slightly. "Inside the property?" "Yes, sir." The room fell silent. I suddenly became very aware of how isolated the estate truly was. Snow-covered woods stretching for acres. Iron gates. High walls. The kind of place built to keep danger out. Or trap it inside. Vincent glanced toward me briefly. "Emma, stay with Lily." "Vincent," I started softly, "maybe she should not be alone right now." "She will not be." The certainty in his voice left no room for argument. Yet before he turned to leave, Lily grabbed his sleeve. Fast. Tight. Vincent froze immediately and looked down at her. Her blue eyes filled with panic. Not for herself. For him. "I will come back," he promised gently. "I always come back." Lily hesitated before slowly letting go. Vincent brushed one hand lightly against her hair and disappeared into the hallway with the guards following behind him. The mansion suddenly felt much larger after he left. Too quiet. Too cold. I sat beside Lily on the bed while Snow continued tapping softly against the windows. Rusty refused to settle completely, ears alert toward every sound outside the room. "He loves you already," I whispered to Lily, scratching gently behind Rusty's ear. Lily looked down at the dog and nodded faintly. Then after several seconds she reached for her sketchpad again. Her hand still trembled slightly as she drew quickly across the paper. When she turned it toward me, my chest tightened instantly. It was a picture of Vincent standing alone in the snow outside the house. No guards. No walls. Just him by himself while darkness surrounded everything around him. Beneath the drawing she slowly wrote 4 uneven words. "He does not sleep." I looked back at her carefully. "How long have you noticed that?" Lily shrugged softly. Then she added another sentence beneath the first. "He checks my room every night." My throat tightened unexpectedly. Suddenly I could picture it perfectly. Vincent Moretti walking these silent hallways at 3 in the morning making sure his daughter was still breathing because grief had already taught him how quickly love could disappear. Rusty suddenly lifted his head again with a sharp alert bark. Lily jumped. So did I. Headlights swept briefly across the snowy windows outside. Then footsteps echoed rapidly down the hallway. The bedroom door opened hard enough to make Lily flinch. Vincent stepped inside breathing heavier now, snow clinging to his dark sweater and shoulders. One glance at his face told me everything before he spoke. Something was wrong. The footprint stopped near the back road, he said quietly to the guards behind him. Whoever it was knew the property layout. Lily's small fingers tightened against Rusty's fur. Vincent noticed. Immediately. He walked toward the bed slower this time, kneeling in front of his daughter until they were eye level. "Listen to me carefully," he said softly. "No matter what happens outside this house, you stay close to Rusty and Emma. Understand?" Lily stared at him silently for 2 long seconds before something happened that made every adult in the room freeze. She nodded once and whispered in a shaky frightened voice barely louder than snow falling outside. "Do not leave." Vincent Moretti looked like a man who had forgotten how to breathe after hearing his daughter say those 3 words. Do not leave. Tiny. Fragile. But enough to shake something loose inside every person standing in that room. Lily stared at him with trembling blue eyes while Rusty pressed tightly against her side, watching the doorway with quiet alertness. Snow continued falling outside the mansion windows, covering the estate in soft white silence that somehow made the moment feel even more fragile. Vincent moved toward the bed slowly like he was approaching something sacred. "I am right here, Principessa," he whispered. Lily's lower lip trembled before she reached for him again. This time Vincent did not hesitate. He sat beside her immediately, wrapping one arm carefully around her shoulders while Rusty rested his giant head across both of their laps. For several seconds nobody spoke. The guards quietly stepped back into the hallway. Maria wiped tears from behind her glasses near the door. And I stood there realizing I was witnessing a family finding its way back to each other one broken piece at a time. Vincent pressed his forehead gently against Lily's hair and closed his eyes. "I am sorry," he whispered so quietly I almost did not hear it. "For all of it." Lily looked up at him silently. Then slowly, awkwardly, like someone relearning how to exist after drowning in grief, she wrapped both arms around him. Vincent broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just one sharp breath leaving his chest as he held his daughter tighter than before. The kind of pain only love could create. Rusty let out a long sigh beside them and finally relaxed completely for the first time all night. The storm outside softened near dawn. By morning, sunlight reflected across fresh snow covering the estate grounds in pale gold. The tension from the night before slowly faded as security confirmed the intruder had disappeared long before reaching the house itself. But somehow none of that mattered as much anymore. Because downstairs in the kitchen, Lily sat beside Rusty feeding him pieces of bacon while quietly humming under her breath. Humming. Maria nearly dropped an entire tray of coffee cups when she heard it. Even the guards looked stunned. Vincent stood frozen near the doorway staring at his daughter like he could not trust what he was hearing. Lily noticed him watching and paused nervously. Then Rusty nudged her arm gently with his nose. She smiled faintly and continued humming anyway. Vincent looked away immediately, one hand covering his mouth for half a second as he fought to pull himself together. I pretended not to notice. Some moments deserve privacy even when they happened right in front of you. Later that afternoon, I walked outside with Lily and Rusty through the snow-covered gardens behind the mansion. Rusty stayed close beside her every step while Lily pointed excitedly toward animal tracks crossing through the trees. Her voice still came quietly. Carefully. But it was there now. Real. Alive. He likes snow, she whispered, smiling as Rusty buried his nose into a drift nearly 2 feet deep. Yeah, I laughed softly. I think he does. Lily looked up at me then. You are staying. The question caught me off guard. Before I could answer, Vincent's voice came from behind us. I was hoping she would. I turned to find him standing near the stone pathway holding Lily's drawing from the night before carefully in his hands. The one with the lonely man standing in the snow. His gray eyes met mine quietly. This house has felt empty for a very long time, Emma. Snowflakes drifted softly between us while Rusty bounded clumsily through the gardens like an oversized puppy despite his age. Lily laughed suddenly. Clear. Bright. Unrestrained. The sound stopped Vincent cold. Completely. Because sometimes healing does not arrive through medicine or time or expensive specialists. Sometimes it arrives covered in snow and muddy paws. And sometimes the souls everyone else gives up on are the very ones capable of bringing a family back to life.